Tonight, has a political mess become a crisis?
Jane Philpott's resignation clearly demonstrates a government in total chaos.
A star minister quits the Trudeau cabinet. Why her resignation might be a turning point. At Issue is here. SNC-Lavalin's story has been a gnawing threat. Bad news in daily increments, met with a shifting Liberal response. But today, the steady drip became a torrent. Jane Philpott says she's seen enough and quit cabinet, joining Jody Wilson-Raybould now as a former minister. Remember, Wilson-Raybould left cabinet just 3 weeks ago. She said she was relentlessly pressured as Attorney General to divert a criminal prosecution of SNC-Lavalin. The Prime Minister called it a disagreement. Today, Jane Philpott called it something else. Tonight, we'll look at what her departure means. Katie Simpson will have reaction, and At Issue will assess the political damage. But David Cochrane kicks things off with a look at the resignation.
It started like a normal day for a cabinet minister, a public event to highlight government's use of artificial intelligence.
An era where government operations and the delivery of better government services is done through and with artificial intelligence technologies.
But what the crowd didn't know and what Philpott didn't tell them was that it would be her last event as a cabinet minister. Philpott's resignation letter makes it clear that she is quitting over the SNC-Lavalin controversy. Sadly, I have lost confidence in how the government has dealt with this matter and in how it has responded to the issues raised. There can be a cost to acting on one's principles, but there is a bigger cost to abandoning them. Before her resignation went public, Philpott was asked about Jody Wilson-Raybould and pushed away all questions.
So I'm here today to celebrate AI Day, and I'm not going to be taking questions on those issues. Thanks.
Philpott and Wilson-Raybould are close friends and political allies. Philpott tweeted her support when Wilson-Raybould quit cabinet. Wilson-Raybould returned the favor when news of Philpott's departure broke.
Jane Philpott's resignation from cabinet clearly demonstrates a government in total chaos, led by a disgraced Prime Minister, consumed with scandal and focused only on his political survival.
Survival is an unsettled question, but function is undeniably hurt. Philpott was seen as one of Trudeau's most capable and trusted ministers, praised at the cabinet table for her judgment and effectiveness in health and Indigenous services before moving to Treasury Board. Once again, it left the Prime Minister to respond to a surprise resignation from a high-profile minister.
I know Ms. Philpott has felt this way for some time, and while I am disappointed, I understand her decision to step down, and I want to thank her for her service. I want to thank her.
His statement was interrupted by protesters, one of many disruptions at this rally about climate change. It's break week for Parliament, but no breaks for the Prime Minister.
I'm listening carefully to the various voices, testimonies, and opinions. There are more questions still to answer and more to be said in the coming days and weeks.
A lot more to come in the coming days. David, Trudeau left a lot unsaid there tonight about starting with the future of Jody Wilson-Raybould.
Yeah, that's right. He did not address whether Jody Wilson-Raybould is going to be able to stay in caucus, a decision made far more complicated by Jane Philpott's resignation earlier today. What a senior government official tells me is that there's no urgency on that decision because Parliament is on break. It's not due back until the 18th of March when parliamentarians return for the budget. And because of that, there is no caucus meeting to worry about. So the timeline is when everyone is back together and when caucus is going to meet. So the week of the 18th, look for that as a timeline, at least for now, Rosie, on when they have to make that decision.
Okay, so this was an unexpected big day today, but Wednesday also expected to be a big day.
Yeah, another big chapter in this story. We're going to hear from the Prime Minister's former top advisor, Jerry Butts. He's going to testify at the Justice Committee, and the clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Wernick, is going to reappear at the Justice Committee. And what another source tells us is that both men have copies of their communications with Jody Wilson-Raybould throughout the period in question in this controversy, and they believe that it will cast her version of events in a very different light. So stay tuned. This is not even close to being over.
Okay, David Cochrane on this story again tonight in Ottawa. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Jane Philpott's departure is resonating across the country, raising questions about the Liberal caucus. And for the opposition, it is a chance to exert maximum pressure. For the government, a chance to try and show some unity. Katie Simpson looks now at the reaction.
In full-on damage control mode, the Liberal MP sent to defend the government downplayed today's resignation.
Well, Jane Philpott's obviously highly respected inside and outside the government. As I understand it, she'll be staying in the Liberal caucus, and so I know all of us will be comforted by that fact.
But a senior source with direct knowledge of the situation tells CBC News there is a recognition within the Prime Minister's team of just how significant this development is. The source compared Jane Philpott's resignation to the Apollo 13 space mission, saying, "Houston, we have a problem." And the opposition knows it.
It looks like the Liberal government is in pure decomposition, an implosion. This is a loss of confidence in his person, in the Prime Minister himself.
It's time for every Liberal cabinet minister to ask themselves the same question Jane Philpott did. Is this what you got into politics for?
CBC News reached out to the remaining 33 members of the Prime Minister's cabinet. All 33 responded with statements of support for Justin Trudeau, including Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland, Finance Minister Bill Morneau, and Labour Minister Patty Hajdu, who says her confidence remains untouched. But not all Liberals share that certainty. Ontario MP Selina Caesar-Chavon, who announced she will not run in the next election, tweeted, "When you add women, please do not expect the status quo. Expect us to make correct decisions, stand for what is right, and exit when values are compromised." New Brunswick MP Wayne Long reiterated his call for a full and transparent investigation.
I'll just say that it's a big loss to Cabinet, and she's done such a great job and is really well liked around here.
In Philpott's Ontario riding, there appears to be early respect for her decision.
I do admire her, though, for taking the stand for her principles. I think it's important.
The Prime Minister desperately needs to stop the fallout from this story. But even those close to him admit there's no obvious path away from the controversy. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Ottawa.
Jane Philpott quitting the front bench, saying she's lost confidence in the government's handling of this SNC-Lavalin crisis. Another big blow, obviously, for the Prime Minister. So what do we make of the loss of 2 cabinet ministers to this affair? How deep a political crisis is this, and what is the damage? It's only Monday, but surely we have to bring At Issue together to break this all down. Chantal Hébert is in Montreal, Andrew Coyne is in Toronto, and Paul Wells joins us in Ottawa tonight. Okay, let's start with, I think, my biggest question I had when I heard the news. Is this resignation of Jane Philpott in some ways perhaps more damaging than Jody Wilson-Raybould? Chantal.
Well, it does pile up. And this resignation from a well-respected, well-liked minister who did not have a dog in the SNC-Lavalin fight comes at a time when Canadians are trying to make up their minds about how damaging they think this saga should be to the Prime Minister. And she seems to be saying, well, whatever you're thinking, pause and reflect on the fact that I, a cabinet minister of talent, can't find his version credible enough to defend.
Andrew, what did you make of it?
I agree with everything that was just said there. This is one of the absolute mainstays of this government, the most universally admired, most competent minister, and another minister other than Jody Wilson-Raybould. So it is validating of a lot of the things she was saying. This was not a resignation to spend more time with her family. I mean, this resignation was absolutely directly aimed at the Prime Minister, at the government, declaring no confidence in the Prime Minister, and specifically on this question of the interference in the prosecution. It will, I think, resonate with a lot of Liberals. You can't dismiss this as either some people are trying to say that it was just sour grapes on Jody Wilson-Raybould's part, or that it's partisanship, the Conservatives going after them. This is an absolute pillar of the Liberal establishment saying this.
And it would be disappointing for a lot of people too, Paul, given what many people think of Jane Philpott.
A lot of people had started to talk themselves into various reasons why Jody Wilson-Raybould's departure could be blamed on Jody Wilson-Raybould. One MP quickly apologized after blaming it on her dad. As Oscar Wilde said about losing parents, one is tragedy, but 2 starts to look like carelessness. It's possible to imagine that if the Prime Minister had responded to Jody Wilson-Raybould's departure with some kind of grace, some kind of apparent awareness of current events, with anything but a solid week of talking points, a news conference about moon exploration, that maybe Jane Philpott could have been persuaded that some of these concerns were being taken seriously. But he didn't, so she didn't.
I want to read one part of the letter. I mean, there's lots of parts that struck me, but one that I felt was very much directed, maybe at the Prime Minister, but certainly at Cabinet. She writes at one point, "But I must abide by my core values, my ethical responsibilities and constitutional obligations. There can be a cost to acting on one's principles, but there is a bigger cost to abandoning them." I mean, she doesn't leave a lot of wiggle room here for the Prime Minister, does she, Chantal?
No, but even if she'd left him more, so far he's failed to take up any of the wiggle room he's had over the past 3 weeks to give a serious accounting of what went on, what his stake actually is, not in little bits and pieces and not in talking points, to the Canadian people. And what this resignation tells us is that it seems that he wasn't any more convincing, or maybe he didn't even bother, to his full cabinet, the first people that he would have explained this to, because if Justin Trudeau had come up with a rationale that people felt they could defend, maybe we wouldn't be working tonight discussing this on a panel. So how damaging is it then, Andrew, to his leadership? Because I think that's what it comes down to. I mean, we can have conversations about the deferred prosecution agreements and all that, but what about his leadership and what this tells us about it?
Well, we'll have to see. We'll have to see ultimately where Cabinet goes in this. In the short term, it sounds like they're rallying around it, but I think they ought to be asking themselves why. Does Jane Philpott know something they don't know? Probably not. Probably she knows exactly what they know. It was enough to move her to say, what I have seen and what I've heard was intolerable. I cannot have confidence in this government. I would be really interested to hear from cabinet ministers why they differ with her on this. What specifically gives them confidence in this government, gives them confidence in the way they've handled this whole issue? That she does not. I think a lot of people will be wondering why their judgment is superior to hers on this.
Paul was in enthusiastic agreement there, Paul.
Yeah, look, it's time to quit with the talking points. It's time for someone in this government who still believes in staying in this government to talk to Canadians as though they're Canadians, as though they're fellow citizens. Jane Philpott's comment about her constitutional obligations sounded to me like a purposeful echo of this sentence from the Open and Accountable Government Handbook, the ethical how-to manual that the Prime Minister told every minister to read and take to heart. The Attorney General is bound by the constitutional principle that the prosecutorial function be exercised independently of partisan concerns. And then the Prime Minister sent 10 people to warn Jody Wilson-Raybould about the elections. That's a direct contravention of what he told his Attorney General was her duty. No wonder ministers are quitting.
So go ahead, Chantal. Yeah.
I can't think of a time when a minister has resigned in solidarity with another minister. And that is why it goes to Justin Trudeau's leadership. Because this isn't about some minister being caught in a conflict with the Prime Minister as the second in command or the partner of the minister who is at the center of the controversy. This is someone, and this isn't over a major direction of the government. So it does go back to, if Jane Philpott doesn't feel comfortable defending Justin Trudeau, what are voters supposed to make of that? And I watched, and we all did, the Prime Minister just now, and he doesn't seem to see that is what people are seeing. And
think of what she is giving up. This wasn't somebody who was on the way down. This is a rising star in the cabinet. People talk about her as potentially a future finance minister. This is a major sacrifice she has made on a point of principle. I'll just say that's a good day for democracy when people are willing to do that.
What does he do, though? So you all agree there's damage. You all agree that this is unprecedented. Is there anything he can do to undo this or to scale it back? Or, I don't know, Paul, beyond, I guess, saying something is what you want him to do, but is there anything he can do?
Tonight in Toronto Danforth, we saw what he's going to try and do. At a climate change rally, he said, we need to keep in mind the bigger picture. It's these issues, these things that seem to preoccupy Jane Philpott are important, but we need to keep in mind the bigger picture. That's eerily reminiscent of what his man Matthew Bouchard told Jody Wilson-Raybould. I know you care about the independence of the prosecutorial function, but we need to win elections. The Trudeauvian, I was going to say the Liberal, but no. Justin Trudeau's version of appealing to principle is to say, look, never mind this, we're in an election year.
Andrew, anything?
I would submit that he should do something else than that.
Okay,
But
Chantal,
there's
yeah.
also, by appealing to looking at the big picture, and I think it's a fair argument to use, look at the big picture. Do you want to throw all this out, throw the baby out with the bathwater?
Yeah.
The problem is that as this crisis continues to escalate and he fails to rise to the challenge of taking control of the narrative and talking to people about it, there will come a time when people who believe in the big picture will say, you are in the way of the big picture, Prime Minister.
Right.
What he has to realize is that this is not a question of communications or strategy. If, you know, that either what Ms. Wilson-Raybould said is true, in which case he needs to come clean and explain and apologize and whatever everything else, or it's not true, in which case he has to show evidence why it's not true. But he can't just sort of strategize or communicate his way out of this. And I fear that if he was aware of that, he wouldn't be in this problem in the first place.
Well, presumably, though, Paul, the response comes from Jerry Butts on Wednesday.
He's not the Prime Minister.
No, but still, presumably that's where the rebuttal comes from.
I mean, what's Jerry Butts going to say? That Jody Wilson-Raybould was confused in her activity, that sometimes she seemed to be motivated one way, sometimes by another? That's great. But, I mean, she's gone now, and the Prime Minister's still the Prime Minister. And members of his caucus are still saying, you know, there was one on Vashi Kaplis' show today saying that SNC-Lavalin is entitled to a deferred prosecution agreement.
Really not a word Liberals want to use.
Yeah, I mean, like, maybe this is why they stick to talking points, because when they actually talk, it sounds like that.
Chantal, last word to you then on whether you think Wednesday will change anything for them.
I know that they believe that. I think all that it will change for them is to leave the Prime Minister no other option but to go to bat more seriously or to take himself out of play.
Okay, everybody. Thanks. Our first of many At Issues this week. Appreciate it. Reminder, you can subscribe to the At Issue podcast. Look for it on iTunes, any major